They sold their own sister for $50. 16-year-old Mercy Holloway stood in the corner of the room, invisible, while her two beautiful sisters haggled over the price of her life. They called her damaged goods, too scarred from the accident that killed their parents. Too ugly, they said, to ever deserve love or happiness. So they sold her. Like a lame horse, like a broken piece of furniture, shipped off to a mysterious widower deep in the Wyoming territory, a man who needed a housekeeper and a nanny for his grieving child, a man who wouldn't be particular about appearances. But her sisters made one critical mistake, a mistake born from greed and cruelty. They thought they were getting rid of a burden. They thought they were cashing in on their family's tragedy. They had absolutely no idea who they just sold their little sister to, and that mistake was about to burn their entire world right down to the ground. The story really begins 3 years earlier, in 1866. A metal horseshoe whistled through the autumn air, a deadly iron bird. It struck 16-year-old Mercy square in the face. A sickening crack echoed across the prairie, louder than the splintering wood of the overturned wagon, louder than the sudden silence where her parents' voices used to be. Blood poured from the gash that split her left cheek open from temple to jaw. She lay crumpled in the dust, the world ringing, her sisters screaming. But they weren't screaming for her. They were screaming for their parents who lay motionless in the wreckage. That was the day everything ended, and the day a new, crueler life began. Now 3 years later, Mercy still woke some mornings touching the thick, ropey scar. It had healed crooked, pulling one corner of her mouth into a permanent, sad little frown. Strangers would look at her, then quickly, uncomfortably, look away. But the deepest wounds weren't on her face. They were the ones left by her sisters, Victoria and Constance, who grew colder with each passing day. The wound of being abandoned while you're still in the room. Mercy Elizabeth Holloway, get away from that window this instant. Victoria's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. At 22, she was the spitting image of their mother. Copper hair, emerald eyes, and a beauty that made men in Cheyenne trip over their own feet. "Mr. Henderson will be here any moment," she snapped, "and I will not have you frightening him off with that face." The words hit harder than the horseshoe ever did. Mercy pressed her palm against the cool glass, staring out at the endless waves of prairie grass. Somewhere out there, there had to be a place where a girl's worth wasn't measured by the smoothness of her skin. A place where scars didn't make you invisible. "Really, Mercy," Constance added. Her voice was softer, but the cut was just as deep. At 19, Constance had a gentler, more delicate beauty. Brown curls and nimble fingers that could embroider flowers so real you'd swear you could smell them. "It's unseemly how you hover when we have gentlemen callers. Surely you understand that your condition makes things awkward for everyone." Your condition, as if she'd chosen it, as if the scar was a mark on her soul, not just her skin. The cramped adobe house felt smaller every day. Victoria had taken the only real bedroom. Constance took the alcove behind the kitchen. Mercy slept on a bedroll in the corner of the main room, a ghost in her own home, surrounded by the ghosts of her parents, her father's pipe on the mantel, her mother's sewing basket gathering dust. "Perhaps you could visit Mrs. Grayson today," Victoria said, adjusting her fine blue silk dress. The translation was clear. Disappear. Get out. Make yourself scarce until the important business is done. Mercy had heard it 100 times before. Victoria would entertain a suitor. Warm smiles for Victoria, polite nods for Constance, and for Mercy, carefully averted eyes. "Victoria," Mercy's voice was a whisper, "why do you hate me so much?" The question hung in the air, thick and heavy. For a split second, Victoria's perfect mask cracked. Mercy saw something raw and ugly flicker in her eyes. Guilt, maybe. Or maybe just the simple, brutal truth that survival had become more important than love. "I don't hate you," Victoria said, her eyes fixed on her own reflection in the cracked mirror. "I simply refuse to let your misfortune drag the rest of us down into poverty and spinsterhood." Just then, the sound of approaching hoofbeats, the jingle of an expensive harness, the creak of a well-made carriage. Mr. Henderson had arrived, and with him, the possibility of salvation, at least for two of the Holloway sisters. Mercy caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. The sad, crooked face, the limp brown hair, the mended gray dress that was more patchwork than fabric. "Remember," Victoria hissed as the carriage wheels crunched outside, "not a word unless spoken to, and for heaven's sake, try to keep that side of your face turned away." Mercy nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She knew her role. Be invisible. Fade into the wallpaper. But as the knock echoed through the house like a judge's gavel, she knew with a bone-deep certainty that something was about to change forever. By sunset, nothing would ever be the same. Mr. Gerald Henderson filled their doorway like a mountain in a wool suit. He was a big man, and the suit probably cost more than the sisters spent on food in 6 months. His thick mustache twitched as his small, calculating eyes swept the room, taking inventory. He wasn't looking at a home. He was sizing up an investment. Every frayed curtain, every sign of their desperate poverty. "Miss Victoria," he boomed, removing his hat with a flourish. The predatory gleam in his eyes killed any hint of gallantry. "You look absolutely radiant." Victoria's curtsy was a work of art. "Mr. Henderson, what an honor." Mercy watched from her corner as his attention shifted to Constance, who blushed and lowered her eyes just as their mother had taught them. Demure, but not cold. Interested, but not eager. Henderson's smile widened. He was clearly pleased with the merchandise. Then his eyes found Mercy. The change was instant, brutal. His smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of pure disgust. He actually took a half step back, as if her scars might be contagious. The silence in the room stretched until Mercy's cheeks burned with shame. "I wasn't aware," Henderson said slowly, his eyes locked on the damaged side of her face, "that you had another sister." "Oh, that's just Mercy," Victoria laughed, a sound as brittle as breaking glass. "Pay her no mind. She was just leaving." But Henderson held up a meaty hand, his merchant's brain already spinning, calculating. "Actually, Miss Victoria, her presence is quite fortuitous. You see, I've come today not merely to court, but to discuss a business proposition." Ice water flooded Mercy's veins. That tone, the same tone he probably used when buying cattle at auction, made every instinct she had scream danger. "A business proposition?" Constance asked, tilting her head. Henderson settled his bulk into their father's old chair, which groaned in protest. From his coat, he produced a leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. More money than the sisters had seen in 3 years. "Ladies, I'll speak plainly," he began, his eyes flicking between Victoria and Constance, deliberately ignoring Mercy. "I am a man of means, looking to establish a proper household. I need a wife, a beautiful, accomplished woman to grace my table and bear my children." Victoria's breath caught. This was it, the moment she'd been waiting for. "However," Henderson continued, "I find myself equally charmed by both of you. How does a man choose between two such perfect flowers?" Mercy bit her tongue so hard she tasted blood. Perfect flowers, as if she wasn't even there. "You're too kind, Mr. Henderson," Victoria murmured, but her eyes had sharpened. She wasn't about to lose this prize to Constance. "Which brings me to my proposition," Henderson said, hefting the coin pouch. "I propose to marry one of you. My choice, naturally. But first, we must address the impediment." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Impediment. The word was a stone thrown into a still pond. His gaze flicked to Mercy, like a man eyeing a bothersome insect. "Your sister's condition would make things awkward for a man in my position. The social gatherings, the wives of my business associates. Well, you understand." "What are you suggesting?" Victoria asked, but she already knew. They all knew. "I happen to know of a man in need of domestic help," Henderson said smoothly. "A recent widower with a young child. Someone who wouldn't be particular about appearances. I would be willing to arrange this placement and naturally compensate you for the inconvenience of separation." It was happening. They were talking about her like she was a stray dog to be given away, a problem to be solved, a burden to be transferred. "How much?" The question shot out of Victoria's mouth, so fast. So eager. It was the sound of betrayal, sharp and final. Mercy felt something inside her chest shatter. $50, Henderson replied, a smug smile spreading across his face. Quite generous considering. Victoria, Mercy whispered, her voice finally breaking free. You can't. But Victoria's eyes had taken on the hard, greedy glitter of a starved animal. $50, it was a fortune. It was freedom from poverty, freedom from this cramped house, freedom from the daily reminder of everything they'd lost. It's for your own good, Mercy, Victoria said, her voice sickeningly reasonable. You'll have a home, employment, a purpose. What more could you ask for? Love, Mercy thought. Family. To matter to someone. And this widower? Constance asked quietly. He's respectable? Oh, quite. Henderson waved a dismissive hand. Caleb Morrison. Runs a modest ranch a few hours from here. Lost his wife in childbirth. Tragic business. He needs someone to care for his daughter. Your sister would be performing a Christian charity. It was a lie, and they all knew it. This wasn't charity. This was disposal. Victoria stood, smoothing her skirts. The decision was made. When would this arrangement take place? Today, if you're agreeable, Henderson said, already reaching for the coins. My foreman, Jake, is waiting outside with a wagon. We could have Mercy settled in her new position before nightfall. Today, the word was a death sentence. I'll need a moment to pack her things, Victoria said briskly. Of course, Henderson replied, counting out the silver coins onto the table. Each clink was another nail in the coffin of Mercy's old life. Her life as a Holloway was over. She was now nothing more than cargo. The metallic clink of silver hitting the table was the only sound in the room. 25, 30, 35. Henderson counted slowly, deliberately, savoring the moment. Victoria's eyes followed each coin, hungry and desperate. $50, the price of a sister. Excellent, Henderson declared, sweeping the money into a neat pile. Jake will have the wagon ready within the hour. I do hope Miss Mercy won't require much time. Mercy stood frozen, watching her life dissolve. The scar on her face throbbed, a burning reminder of how quickly everything could be taken away. Mercy doesn't have much, Constance said, her voice barely a whisper. She couldn't meet Mercy's eyes. Just some clothes. Splendid, Henderson beamed, heading for the door. I'll inform Mr. Morrison to expect his new household manager by evening. Manager. The word was a joke, a cruel, polite lie to make the transaction feel less like what it was, human trafficking. After Henderson's carriage rumbled away, a thick, suffocating silence fell over the house. Victoria began folding Mercy's few dresses, her movements sharp, efficient, final. Constance just sat at the table, staring at her own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. Say something, Mercy whispered, her voice cracking. Please, just tell me you're sorry. Victoria's hand stilled for a second. I'm doing what's best for all of us, Mercy. You'll understand someday. Best for you. Mercy's voice rose, 3 years of swallowed pain finally boiling over. When did I stop being your sister and start being just a problem you had to solve? The day that horse kicked you. Victoria whirled around, her beautiful face twisted with an ugly, raw emotion. The day you became a constant, walking reminder of everything we lost. Do you think it's easy living with that face staring at me every morning? Remembering Mom and Papa every single time I look at you? The truth. Finally. It wasn't just about money or marriage prospects. Her scars weren't just ugly to them. They were a painful mirror. Victoria, stop, Constance murmured, but there was no strength in her voice. No, she needs to hear this. Victoria's control shattered completely. For 3 years, I've watched men walk away because they couldn't stomach looking at her. 3 years of pretending we're still a family. But we're not, are we? We're 3 broken pieces that don't fit together anymore. Mercy's hand flew to her scar, tracing its rough texture. I never asked for this. And I never asked to be responsible for you, Victoria shot back. But here we are. At least now you'll have a roof over your head and work to do. It's more than many people get. Then came the final, killing blow. Not from Victoria, but from the gentle, quiet sister. "It's more than you deserve," Constance said, her voice soft, but the words were pure poison. Given everything. That was it, the ultimate betrayal. Constance, who had once braided her hair and sung her to sleep, had just driven the knife in and twisted it. A sharp knock at the door saved them from whatever would have come next. A weathered man stood outside beside a plain wooden wagon. Jake, Henderson's foreman. He'd come to collect the cargo. "Miss Holloway," he called through the door. "Time to go." Victoria handed Mercy a small carpet bag. Inside were 3 patched dresses, a pair of worn boots, and their mother's silver locket. Her entire 16 years of life, packed into a space smaller than a bread box. "The locket," Mercy said, surprised. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of something, regret, guilt, crossed Victoria's face. "Mama would have wanted you to have it." But the gesture felt hollow, a tiny bandage on a gaping wound. Mercy fastened it around her neck. Its familiar weight was the only anchor she had left. "All right," Constance said suddenly, the words tumbling out. "Once you're settled." They both knew it was a lie. What would she even say? "Dear Mercy, how's life as a $50 servant? We're much happier without your ugly face around. Love, your sisters." Mercy walked to the door. At the threshold, she turned for one last look. She memorized their faces, the sisters who had raised her, taught her, and now sold her. "Goodbye," she whispered. Neither of them answered. Jake helped her into the wagon with a surprising gentleness. As the wheels began to turn, Mercy watched the only home she'd ever known shrink into the distance. Victoria and Constance stood in the doorway, 2 beautiful statues, not waving, not calling out, just watching their problem disappear over the horizon. The Wyoming prairie stretched out, an endless golden ocean. Somewhere out there, Caleb Morrison and his daughter were waiting, strangers who now owned her. But as the house vanished from sight, a strange feeling stirred in Mercy's chest. It was a tiny, fragile thing, but it was there. For the first time in 3 years, she was free. Free from their judgment, free from their pity, free from being the constant, ugly reminder of a life that was gone forever. Maybe being nobody's problem was the first step to becoming somebody. The wagon wheels crunched a steady rhythm against the dirt road, carrying Mercy deeper into the unknown. Jake, the foreman, hadn't spoken much, but his silence was the comfortable kind, the quiet of a man used to the vast emptiness of the prairie. "Nervous?" he asked suddenly, his voice raspy from wind and dust. Mercy jumped, then nodded. "Wouldn't you be?" A hint of a smile cracked his weathered face. "Reckon I would. Moving in with strangers ain't easy. Especially when you're not a guest, but a piece of property," she thought. "Tell me about them," she said instead. "The Morrisons." He was quiet for a long time. A hawk circled high above them, a black speck against the endless blue sky. "Caleb's a good man," Jake said finally. "Fair boss, pays his debts, treats his animals right. Tells you a lot about a man, how he treats his stock." "And his wife?" Mercy asked, then felt a pang of foolishness. "His late wife, I mean." "Sarah," Jake's voice softened. "She was special, had a way of making a place feel like a home. Could make a feast out of scraps and patch up any hurt, inside or out." He shook his head. "Caleb ain't been the same since she passed. Neither has little Emma." The child. Mercy's stomach clenched with a fresh wave of anxiety. What if the little girl saw her face and screamed? "How old is Emma?" "4," Jake said with a flicker of genuine fondness. "4 going on 40. Smart as a whip. Used to chatter like a magpie, but since her mama—" He trailed off, letting the silence say the rest. They crested a small hill, and the Morrison ranch spread out below them. It was beautiful. Not fancy, but honest. A 2-story house of weathered wood with a wide wraparound porch, a big red barn, a chicken coop, several corrals. It looked like a real home, a place where a family could put down roots and grow. An ache of longing tightened Mercy's chest. "There's Emma now," Jake said, pointing. A tiny figure sat on the porch swing. Dark curls, enormous brown eyes that seemed to take up half her face. She wore a simple blue dress and clutched a rag doll with fierce loyalty. But what struck Mercy was her stillness. She wasn't swinging or fidgeting. She just sat, watching them approach with the unnerving patience of a much older person. The front door opened, and Caleb Morrison stepped onto the porch. Mercy's breath caught. He was nothing like she'd imagined. Not some grizzled old man, but tall and lean, probably no older than 30, with dark hair already streaked with silver at the temples. His clothes were simple work pants and a clean white shirt. The clothes of a man who worked hard, but took pride in himself. But it was his face that stunned her. Strong features etched with grief, but not hardened by it. And his eyes. They were deep and intelligent. A mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile, but might remember, given a reason. His eyes met hers across the yard. Mercy braced herself for the familiar flinch, the quick, disgusted glance away. It never came. He looked at her, really looked at her, his gaze steady and evaluative. There was no shock, no disgust, no pity. He was simply assessing her, the way he might assess a new ranch hand. "Miss Holloway," he said as Jake helped her down. His voice was deep and steady. "I trust the journey wasn't too difficult." "No, sir," Mercy managed. "Thank you for taking me in." The words felt small and stupid. "Thank you for buying me." "Emma," Caleb called gently, "come meet Miss Mercy." The little girl slid off the swing, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked right up to Mercy and stared, her gaze fixed directly on the scar. "Does it hurt?" Emma asked, her voice a quiet little peep. The question was so direct, so innocent, it almost made Mercy smile. "Not anymore, sweetheart. Sometimes old hurts stop hurting, even when they leave marks." Emma nodded solemnly, as if this was the most profound wisdom she'd ever heard. Then she did something that shocked Mercy to her core. She reached out and took Mercy's hand. Her tiny fingers wrapped around one of Mercy's. "Papa said you're going to help take care of me," Emma said. "Mama used to do that, but she went to heaven." The simple, brutal honesty of it hit Mercy right in the chest. Here was another broken person, another soul adrift in a world that had suddenly become too big and too empty. "I'd like that very much," Mercy said softly. For the first time, a tiny spark of light flickered in Emma's serious eyes. "Do you know any stories?" "I know lots of stories." "Good," Emma declared with finality. "I like stories." Caleb watched them, and Mercy saw a wave of something, relief, wash over his face. Maybe he'd been just as nervous as she was. "Let me show you to your room," he said, taking her small bag. "You must be tired." As they walked toward the house, Emma's small hand still holding hers, Mercy felt the first tentative stirring of hope. Maybe this wasn't a prison. Maybe it was a hospital, a place where three broken people could, just maybe, start to heal each other. But as she stepped across the threshold, another thought chilled her to the bone. What if Victoria's rumors were true? What if this kind, grieving man wasn't what he seemed? What if she had just walked out of one trap and straight into another, far more dangerous one? The screaming started at 2 in the morning. It was a raw, terrified sound that ripped through the silence of the house and yanked Mercy from a deep sleep. For a disoriented second, she thought she was back in Cheyenne, listening to her sisters fight. Then reality crashed in. She was at the Morrison Ranch. And that wasn't anger. That was pure, primal terror. Emma was having another nightmare. Mercy was out of bed in an instant, her bare feet hitting the cold floorboards. In the doorway of Emma's room, she saw the little girl thrashing in her bed, tangled in the sheets, her face flushed with feverish terror. "Mama! Oh, Mama, don't leave me! I'll be good, I promise!" The words were a knife in Mercy's heart. Caleb was already there, kneeling beside the bed, his strong hands hovering helplessly over his daughter. His face in the dim lamplight was a mask of exhaustion and defeat. This was clearly a familiar torture. "Emma, sweetheart, you're safe," he murmured, his voice rough with worry. "Papa's here." But Emma couldn't hear him. She was lost somewhere else, reliving the moment her world shattered. Mercy had seen that look before, in her own mirror, in the weeks after the accident. Without thinking, Mercy moved to the other side of the bed. She began to hum, an old, simple lullaby her own mother used to sing during thunderstorms. Her voice wasn't beautiful like Victoria's, or trained like Constance's, but it was steady, and it was kind. Slowly, miraculously, Emma's thrashing subsided. Her cries softened to whimpers. Her breathing deepened from ragged gasps to the steady rhythm of true sleep. Caleb stared at Mercy across the small bed, his eyes wide with a look of stunned disbelief. "How did you do that?" "Experience," Mercy said simply, smoothing Emma's damp curls off her forehead. "Sometimes the only way out of a nightmare is to hear a friendly voice." They stood watch together for another hour, a silent, shared vigil. In the soft light, Mercy studied Caleb's profile. The strong jaw, the worry lines etched around his eyes, the gentle way his hand rested on Emma's blanket. "She used to sleep through the night," he said quietly, as if speaking to himself, "before Sarah died. Now, she's afraid. Afraid that if she falls asleep, she'll lose someone else." "I know the feeling," Mercy admitted. "After my parents, I used to fight sleep for weeks. I was convinced if I closed my eyes, my sisters would disappear too." His gaze fell to the scar on her face, but for the first time, the look in a man's eyes held not revulsion, but a quiet, thoughtful curiosity. "And your sisters, how did they help you through it?" The question was a sharp, unexpected jab. She remembered those nights. Victoria, overwhelmed and trying to figure out how they would survive. Constance, lost in her own grief. Neither had time for a terrified 13-year-old's nightmares. They told her to be brave, to be quiet, to grow up. "They did their best," Mercy said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "Everyone grieves differently." Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. He was too smart to miss the evasion. She could see him filing the information away, piecing together the story of the sisters who had sold her for $50. "I should get back to bed," she said, suddenly uncomfortable under his scrutiny. "Bread to bake in the morning." "Mercy," his voice stopped her at the door. "Thank you." "It's why I'm here," she replied. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true anymore. In the 12 days she'd been here, caring for Emma had stopped being a job. It had started to feel like a purpose. Back in her own room, Mercy lay awake. The house was full of ghosts, but not the scary kind. It was the ghost of Sarah Morrison. Her presence was in every perfectly folded towel, every neatly organized spice jar, every photograph Caleb still couldn't bring himself to put away. Mercy was living in the shadow of a perfect wife, a perfect mother. How could she ever compete with a memory? The answer came a few days later, from Emma herself. Mercy was rolling out dough for cookies. "Mama never made cookies shaped like horses," the little girl observed. "Would you like me to?" Mercy asked. Emma's nod was so enthusiastic her curls bounced. "Mama always made circles, but I like horses better." And just like that, Mercy understood. She wasn't here to be a replacement. She couldn't be Sarah Morrison. She had to be Mercy Holloway, scarred, imperfect, but here, now. Emma didn't need someone to recreate old memories. She needed someone to help her make new ones. The next morning, Emma woke up with the sun, chattering about a dream she'd had. "We were sailing, Mercy, on a big boat, just like in your song. And there were dolphins." Caleb appeared in the doorway, and when he saw his daughter, happy and animated, his entire face transformed. For a brief moment, the grieving widower was gone, replaced by just a father. "Pancakes?" he asked, a real smile touching his lips for the first time. "Horse-shaped pancakes," Emma corrected importantly. "Mercy makes them special." As Mercy served breakfast, she caught Caleb watching her. There was gratitude in his eyes, yes, but something else too. Something deeper. It was a look that said he wasn't just seeing a housekeeper anymore. He was seeing her. And in that moment, Mercy felt a dangerous, terrifying flutter in her chest. A tiny seed of hope that maybe, just maybe, this broken place could become a whole home. But hope is a fragile thing on the Wyoming prairie, and it was about to be put to the test. A letter was on its way from Cheyenne. A letter filled with poison and lies. A letter that would threaten to tear their fragile new family apart before it even had a chance to form. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, carried by a traveling preacher just as the first serious snow of November began to fall. Mercy was in the kitchen, a comfortable warmth radiating from the stove, when she heard the knock. "Miss Mercy," Emma called from the front room. "There's a man here with a letter for you." A letter? Her heart leaped into her throat. In 6 weeks, she'd heard nothing. It was as if Victoria and Constance had simply ceased to exist. The preacher was a thin, kind-eyed man with snow melting in his beard. He pulled a wrinkled envelope from his coat. Her name was written on the front in Victoria's elegant, familiar script. "From your sister in Cheyenne," he said. "Ask me to deliver it personally." Her fingers trembled as she took it. Why now? After all this silence, what could Victoria possibly have to say? She escaped to her room, the letter clutched in her hand. The paper felt cold, dangerous. She tore it open. "Dearest Mercy," it began, the lie already choking her. "I hope this finds you well. Constance and I think of you often. I write with news that I am certain will interest you. Mr. Henderson and I were married 3 weeks ago, so Victoria had gotten her prize." Mercy felt a bitter pang. "However, I must also share some troubling information. It has come to our attention that your current employer may not be the respectable widower we were led to believe. There are rumors in town, Mercy, whispers about Mr. Morrison's past, suggestions that his wife's death was not entirely natural. Some say he has a violent temper, that Sarah Morrison lived in fear in her final months." The words leaped off the page, venomous and sharp. She read the paragraph again, her hands starting to shake. Caleb? Violent? The man who patiently taught Emma how to tie her shoes? The man who spoke to his horses in a low, gentle voice? It was impossible. It had to be. "I feel it is my duty as your sister to warn you. Mr. Henderson has graciously offered to arrange alternative employment for you, somewhere you would be properly supervised and protected. Of course, this would require returning the $50 Mr. Morrison paid, but Henderson assures me this can be managed. All you need to do is write back, and we will come and rescue you from what may be a very dangerous situation. Your loving sister, Victoria Henderson." Rescue her or reclaim her? The timing was too perfect, the concern too sudden. After 6 weeks of silence, Victoria was suddenly worried for her safety? No, something else was going on. Something had changed in Cheyenne. Something that made Victoria want her back under her thumb. But what? A soft knock on her door made her jump. "Mercy?" It was Caleb. "The preacher mentioned your letter might have troubling news. Is everything all right?" She stared at the door, Victoria's accusations screaming in her mind. Violent temper. Her death was not natural. How well did she really know the man on the other side of that door? But then she thought of Emma, the easy, trusting way the little girl climbed into her father's lap, the way she ran to him, not away from him, when she was hurt or scared. Children who live with violence learn to be careful. They learn to make themselves small. Emma Morrison wasn't afraid of her father. Mercy opened the door. Caleb stood in the hall, his dark eyes searching her face, looking for the source of the trouble. "My sister wrote," she said, holding up the letter. "She has concerns." His expression became very still. "What kind of concerns?" "She's heard rumors about your wife's death, about your temperament." The words hung between them. She watched his face, braced for the anger, for the violent temper Victoria had warned her about. Instead, she saw something far more devastating, a deep, weary resignation, as if this wasn't the first time he'd heard these ugly whispers. "I see," he said quietly. "And what do you believe?" The question caught her completely off guard. He wasn't defending himself. He wasn't denying it. He was asking for her judgment, as if her opinion mattered. "I believe," Mercy said slowly, the words feeling heavy and important, "that people in small towns love to talk, and I believe that grief makes people cruel. They need someone to blame." A fraction of the tension left his shoulders. "Your sister wants you to leave." It wasn't a question. Mercy nodded. "She's offered to find me another position." "And what do you want?" Again, that simple, direct question. When was the last time anyone had asked her that? For 3 years, her life had been decided for her. By Victoria, by Constance, by Henderson. No one had ever asked what Mercy Holloway wanted. "I want," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "to stay here, with you and Emma, if you'll have me. Even with the rumors?" "Let them talk," Mercy said, a fierce, unexpected strength rising in her. "I know what I've seen here. The rest is just noise." A long moment passed between them. Something shifted. A line had been crossed. They weren't just an employer and an employee anymore. "Thank you," Caleb said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. As he turned to go, she had to ask, "Caleb, the rumors. What really happened to Sarah?" He paused, his hand gripping the banister. "She hemorrhaged," he said, his back still to her. "After Emma was born. The doctor was hours away. I couldn't stop the bleeding. I couldn't save her." He shrugged, a gesture of profound defeat. But when someone young dies like that, people need a villain. It's easier than accepting that sometimes terrible things just happen. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "So am I," he said, turning back to look at her. "But I'm not sorry you're here." After he was gone, Mercy went to the kitchen stove. She crumpled Victoria's letter into a ball and dropped it into the flames. She watched the elegant handwriting curl, blacken, and turn to ash. Outside, the snow was falling harder, blanketing the world in a silent, peaceful white. It was sealing them in, the three of them, in their small, broken home. For the first time in a very long time, Mercy felt safe. But she was wrong. The real storm hadn't even started yet. The blizzard hit 3 days before Christmas. It didn't just snow, it was an assault. A howling, white fury that buried the ranch under 4 feet of snow and turned the world into a crystal prison. "Storm's getting worse," Caleb said, stomping into the kitchen from the barn, ice clinging to his eyebrows. "Good thing we're stocked up." "Are we trapped, Papa?" Emma asked, her small face creased with worry. "Not trapped, sweetheart," Caleb said gently. "Just cozy." But Mercy saw the flicker of concern in his eyes. This wasn't a normal storm. This was a killer. The first sign of real trouble came that evening. The wind was so fierce it was forcing smoke back down the chimneys. The house began to fill with a hazy, choking smog. "The caps are blocked with snow," Caleb said, his face grim. "I have to go up and clear them." "On the roof? In this?" Mercy cried. It was madness. "We have no choice," he said. "We'll freeze without the fires." She watched through the window as he climbed onto the slick, ice-covered roof, a dark figure against the swirling white chaos. Every gust of wind threatened to peel him off and send him flying into the darkness. "He's going to fall," she whispered, her heart pounding. "Papa's careful," Emma said from a chair beside her. "He promised Mama he'd always come back inside." The simple, childish faith in her voice was heartbreaking. Emma couldn't comprehend losing another parent, but Mercy knew better. Promises couldn't stop the wind. A loud crack from above made them both jump. It was the sound of wood splintering under immense pressure. They heard Caleb shout, then a heavy thud, then silence. A terrifying, absolute silence, broken only by the screaming of the wind. "Papa," Emma called, her voice small. More silence. Mercy's mind flashed with horrible images. Caleb lying unconscious in a snowdrift, slowly freezing to death just yards from safety. "Stay here," she ordered Emma, grabbing her coat. "Don't open this door for anyone." The second she stepped outside, the cold stole her breath. The wind tore at her, a physical force trying to throw her to the ground. She fought her way around the side of the house, screaming Caleb's name into the gale. "Here!" His voice was strained, and it came from above. She looked up, and her blood ran cold. He was hanging from the edge of the roof, his legs dangling in empty space. A section of the porch roof had collapsed under the weight of the snow, taking his ladder with it. He was stranded, clinging to an icy gutter, his strength fading fast. "Let go!" she shouted over the wind. "I'll catch you!" "You'll get hurt!" he yelled back, but she could hear the exhaustion in his voice. He couldn't hold on much longer. "Emma needs her father!" she screamed. "Now let go!" She braced herself in the deep snowdrift below him. For a moment he hesitated. Then his grip failed, and he dropped. The impact was like being hit by a train. His weight drove her down, deep into the powder, knocking the air from her lungs. For a terrifying second, she was buried, suffocating, convinced this was how she would die. Then strong hands were digging her out, brushing snow from her face with urgent, frantic gentleness. "Mercy, are you hurt? Talk to me." Caleb's face was inches from hers, his eyes wild with concern. "I'm fine," she gasped, though every bone in her body ached. "You?" "Nothing broken," he said, pulling her to her feet, his arms staying tight around her waist. "That was the most foolish, brave thing I have ever seen." They stumbled back to the house, leaning on each other. Emma flung the door open, her face white with fear, which melted into pure relief when she saw them both. She threw her arms around their legs in a fierce hug that included Mercy without question. Standing there in the warm kitchen, snow melting in puddles on the floor, Mercy felt it again. That shift. This wasn't a job. This wasn't a temporary shelter. This was family. The chimneys were still blocked, so they huddled in the kitchen, the only room with a working stove. They dragged mattresses onto the floor and built a fort of blankets, a tiny island of warmth in the freezing house. They told stories to pass the long, dark hours. Caleb talked about his childhood in Kansas. Emma told elaborate tales of magical horses. "Your turn, Mercy," Emma said, snuggling against her. "Tell us a story about when you were little." What could she say? The happy memories felt too painful, and the sad ones too dark. "I had sisters," she said finally. "We used to pretend we were explorers, searching for treasure." "Did you find any?" Emma asked, her voice sleepy. Mercy thought of Victoria and Constance, of the love they'd once shared. "Yes," she said softly. "We found each other. That was the best treasure of all." It wasn't true anymore, but it had been, once. Across their nest of blankets, in the flickering light from the stove, Caleb's eyes met hers. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The look on his face said everything: gratitude, admiration, and something else. Something that made her heart beat faster. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside their makeshift fort, wrapped in a fragile, unexpected warmth, Mercy felt a sense of belonging she hadn't known since she was a little girl. She didn't know that just a few miles away, in a warm, comfortable house in Cheyenne, Victoria and her new husband were plotting. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one they were about to unleash. When the blizzard finally broke, the world was silent, white, and beautiful. But the peace was shattered by the arrival of an elegant carriage, picking its way through the snow drifts like a black beetle on a white plate. Mercy saw it from the kitchen window, and her stomach plummeted. She knew that carriage. She knew the matched pair of horses. Henderson. "Caleb," she called, her voice tight with alarm. "We have visitors." He came and stood beside her, and when he saw the carriage, his face hardened into a quiet, dangerous mask. "Emma, go to your room," he said, his eyes never leaving the approaching vehicle. The carriage stopped. Henderson climbed out, wrapped in a thick fur coat, and behind him, resplendent in emerald green wool, was Victoria. She scanned the yard, her eyes landing on Mercy in the doorway. It wasn't a sister's glance. It was the look of a general sizing up enemy territory. "Mr. Morrison," Henderson boomed, ignoring the half-dozen neighbors who had come to help clear the snow. "We've come for my sister-in-law. I'm afraid there has been a terrible misunderstanding about her situation here." The word situation dripped with insinuation. Mercy felt her cheeks burn. He was implying something improper. Something shameful was happening between her and Caleb. "I'm not sure I understand," Caleb said, his voice dangerously calm. "Miss Mercy is employed here. There is no misunderstanding." Henderson produced a folded document from his coat. "This is a legal guardianship transfer, signed by my wife as Mercy's eldest sister. It grants us the authority to remove her from what we have determined to be an unsuitable environment." Legal guardianship? Victoria had never been her legal guardian. It was a lie, a legal trick cooked up by Henderson. "This appears to be an order," Caleb said after reading the document, his voice carefully controlled. "Though I question the timing. If her welfare was your concern, why wait 3 months to act?" "We had to gather evidence, naturally," Victoria said, her laugh like chipping ice. Reports of impropriety take time to investigate. What impropriety? The voice came from Jake, who had stopped his work. Several other neighbors murmured in agreement. I ain't never seen nothing but proper behavior from Caleb Morrison. The perception of impropriety, Henderson said smoothly, can be just as damaging. An unmarried girl, alone with a widower, decent society has concerns. The trap was closing. Victoria wasn't here to save her. She was here to destroy the happiness Mercy had found. But why? Why now? Then Mercy saw it, a subtle but unmistakable swell beneath Victoria's fashionable coat. She was pregnant, and suddenly everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. A wealthy pregnant wife would need help, an unpaid servant to manage the house, to care for the baby, someone who owed her everything, someone she could control completely. I see, Mercy said, stepping out into the cold air. The words came out louder and stronger than she expected. Congratulations on your pregnancy, Victoria. When is the baby due? Victoria's face went from white to red. The neighbors exchanged knowing looks. The game was up. I don't know what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting you need a nanny, Mercy cut her off. Someone to scrub your floors and raise your child while you attend parties. But I'm not that person anymore. You ungrateful little... Victoria started forward, her mask of civility finally cracking. Enough! Caleb's voice was like the crack of a whip. Miss Mercy is of legal age. She can make her own decisions. He turned to Mercy, his dark eyes serious and searching. The choice is yours, Mercy. You can go with them, or you can stay here. He paused, and his next words changed everything. You can stay here as part of our family. Our family. Not employee, not housekeeper. Family. The words were a sunrise after the longest night of her life. I'm staying, she said, her voice clear and loud for everyone to hear. This is my home now. You can't, Victoria shrieked. She's 18 years old. Jake called out, a broad grin on his face. Legal age. That paper of yours ain't worth the ink it's printed with, Henderson. Henderson's face turned a shade of purple. He had been outplayed, his legal threat dismantled in front of a dozen witnesses. He had underestimated the scarred girl and the quiet rancher. He had underestimated their community. You'll regret this, Victoria spat, her voice shaking with rage as they climbed back into the carriage. Both of you. As the carriage rolled away, Emma slipped her small hand into Mercy's. Are they going to come back? Mercy looked at Caleb, at his steady, determined face. Maybe, she said, but if they do, we'll face them together. All three of us? Emma asked. All three of us, Mercy confirmed. The battle had been won, but Mercy had a cold, sinking feeling that the war was just beginning. Henderson was not a man who accepted defeat, and he was about to prove just how far he would go to get what he wanted. The first rifle shot exploded a fence post into splinters. It was a Sunday morning, clear and cold. Mercy was feeding the chickens when the crack echoed across the ranch. She dropped the bucket and threw herself behind the water trough, just as a second shot kicked up dirt exactly where she had been standing. This wasn't a warning. This was an assassination attempt. Emma! The thought was a shard of ice in her gut. The little girl had been playing on the front porch. I'm in the root cellar! A small voice called from beneath the house. Papa taught me to hide here when there's trouble. Relief washed over Mercy, so powerful it made her weak. At least Emma was safe. Another shot shattered the kitchen window. Glass rained down like deadly ice. This wasn't random. This was targeted. This was Henderson's answer to their defiance. From the cottonwood trees by the creek, she saw them. 3 riders, faces hidden by bandanas, rifles glinting in the sun. You folks got until sunset to pack up and get out, a harsh voice yelled from the trees. Next time we come calling, we won't be so polite. The riders galloped off, leaving a silence that was more terrifying than the gunshots. Caleb emerged from the barn, his own rifle in his hands, his face a grim, cold mask of fury. They'll be back, Mercy said, her voice shaking. Tonight, when it's dark. Then we'll be ready, Caleb replied, but she could hear the strain in his voice. 2 adults and a child against hired guns. The odds weren't good. There's another way, Mercy said, an idea sparking in her mind. A dangerous, crazy idea. What if we aren't here when they come back? You want to run? No, she said. I want to go to town, right now. All three of us. That's not a solution. It is if we make some noise, she explained, the plan taking shape. Henderson's power comes from his reputation. He's a respectable businessman. What happens to that reputation if the whole town finds out he's hiring gunmen to terrorize a family with a 4-year-old child? They rode to Cheyenne, not in defeat, but as a strategic retreat. Mercy directed Caleb to the boarding house run by Mrs. Patterson, the town's unofficial gossip hub. "Mercy Holloway!" the kind old woman exclaimed. "What brings you to town, dear? And with such a lovely family." She beamed at Caleb and Emma. "We need rooms for the night, Mrs. Patterson," Mercy said, loud enough for others in the parlor to hear. "There's been some trouble at the ranch." "What kind of trouble?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "The kind that involves men with rifles," Caleb said, his voice low and serious, "and threats against my daughter." That was all it took. The story spread through the boarding house, then out into the town, like wildfire. Henderson had been buying up land, pressuring people, but this was different. This was violence. This was an attack on one of their own. That evening in the dining room, a grizzled old rancher called out, "Heard you had some visitors today, Morrison." "3 of them," Caleb confirmed calmly. "Told us to be gone by sunset." "And what did you tell them?" Caleb's smile was thin and dangerous. "We told them we'd think about it, from the safety of town, where there are plenty of witnesses." A ripple of appreciative laughter went through the room. The sheriff, who happened to be sitting at the next table, looked up. "Real shame," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "when varmints start bothering law-abiding citizens on their own property. A real shame the law has to get involved." The message was clear. Henderson's private war was now a public problem. They had turned his own weapon, public opinion, against him. But Mercy knew Henderson wouldn't be defeated so easily. He had been shamed, and a shamed man is a desperate man, and a desperate man is the most dangerous kind of all. They rode back to the ranch at dawn. From the top of the hill, they saw the smoke. Not the gentle curl from a chimney, but a thick, angry pillar of black smoke, rising from where the hay barn should be. "No," Caleb whispered, urging the horses into a frantic gallop. It was worse than they could have imagined. The barn was a smoldering ruin, 6 months of winter feed, their entire investment gone. Every window in the house was smashed. The front door hung from a single hinge, and painted across the wall, in big red letters that looked like blood, was a single word: leave. But they weren't alone. Neighbors were already there, a bucket brigade fighting the last of the flames. The community had seen the smoke and come running. Henderson's attack hadn't isolated them. It had united the entire county against him. The sheriff met them, his face grim. They were professionals, knew exactly how much damage to cause without technically burning down a dwelling. He held up something small and silver, but they got sloppy, found this by the window. It was a button, an ornate silver button with the letter H engraved in the center. Mercy's breath caught. "That's from Henderson's formal coat. I've seen him wear it." The sheriff's smile was grim. Funny how evidence has a way of turning up when you know where to look. The day was a blur of cleaning and repairs. The community rallied around them, bringing food, lumber, and help. But as the sun set, Caleb's face was etched with despair. "The house is livable," he said, "but the barn, the feed, Mercy, we're ruined. We're looking at more debt than this ranch can ever carry. Henderson will win after all, not with bullets, but with the bank." Just as the last sliver of hope seemed to fade, he spoke again, his voice carefully neutral. "I had another visitor today, Victoria." Mercy's blood ran cold. "She came to express her sympathies," Caleb said, "and she made an offer." He took a deep breath. $50,000 for you. She wants you to come work for her, permanently. In exchange, she'll give us enough money to cover all our losses and rebuild." $50,000, a staggering, life-changing sum. Enough to save them, enough to secure Emma's future. All it would cost was Mercy's freedom, her happiness, her family. "What did you tell her?" Mercy whispered, her heart hammering. "I told her," Caleb said, and he finally looked at her, his eyes full of a fierce, unwavering loyalty, that the decision wasn't mine to make. "I told her you were free to go, but I also told her that you were part of this family now, and family doesn't abandon each other just because times get hard." Tears pricked Mercy's eyes. After everything, he was still choosing her, over safety, over wealth. "What do you want, Mercy?" he asked softly. She looked at the damaged house, at the kind faces of the neighbors still working, at Emma sleeping peacefully in a nearby wagon. This was more than a ranch. It was a home. It was love. It was everything she had ever wanted. "I want to stay," she said, her voice firm. "I want to fight." Caleb's smile was like the sun breaking through the darkest clouds. "Then we'd better figure out how to save this ranch." As if on cue, the sheriff approached, a strange, excited glint in his eye. "Folks," he said, barely able to contain a grin, "while I was in town asking questions about that button, I learned some very interesting things about Mr. Henderson's business practices. Seems he's been moving money around in ways the territorial government might find educational. Very illegal ways. And there it was, the weapon they needed. Henderson had overplayed his hand. In his greedy, violent rush to ruin them, he had left a trail, and that trail was about to lead directly to his own destruction. The next morning, Mercy, Caleb, and Sheriff Hayes walked into the Cheyenne Bank. They didn't go to ask for a loan. They went to make a withdrawal, not of money but of justice. The evidence was undeniable. Fraud, extortion, land grabbing. Henderson had built his empire on bullying and illegal schemes. The silver button tied him to the arson. The financial records tied him to a dozen other crimes. By noon, he was in custody, but the final piece of the puzzle fell into place when a frantic, weeping Constance showed up at the sheriff's office. It turned out Victoria hadn't just been cruel. She'd been desperate. Henderson had been abusing her, and she was terrified. She'd wanted Mercy back not just as a nanny, but as a shield, an ally. The $50,000 offer wasn't a purchase price. It was a desperate plea for help from one sister to another. In the end, Henderson was sent to prison. His assets were seized by the territory, and a significant portion was awarded to the Morrisons as restitution for the damages. It was more than enough to rebuild the barn, restock their feed, and secure the ranch for years to come. Victoria, humbled and broken, left Cheyenne with Constance, heading west to start a new, quieter life, far from the shadows of their mistakes. Before she left, she came to the ranch one last time. There were no excuses, just a simple, tearful, "I'm sorry, Mercy, for everything." Mercy found she couldn't hold on to the hate. She simply nodded and wished her sister peace. One evening, months later, Mercy, Caleb, and Emma were sitting on the newly rebuilt porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. The ranch was thriving. Emma was laughing again, her nightmares replaced by dreams of dolphins and horse-shaped pancakes. Caleb turned to Mercy, his hand finding hers. The calluses on his palm felt warm and strong against her skin. "That $50 my sisters got for you," he said, his voice soft. "It was the best investment I ever made." "They sold me as a housekeeper," Mercy said, a real, true smile spreading across her face, a smile that reached her eyes and erased the permanent frown the scar had given her. "They had no idea they were selling you a partner." He leaned in, and his lips met hers in a gentle, promising kiss that tasted of hope and second chances. In the fading light, her scar was no longer a mark of tragedy. It was a testament to survival, a reminder that the deepest wounds can heal, and that sometimes the most broken things can be put back together to create something even more beautiful and stronger than before. She had been sold, discarded, and terrorized, but she had found her treasure, she had found her home, she had found her family. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and justice, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another tale. Let us know in the comments what you think. Can family truly be chosen? Until next time, stay safe out there.